So this video has been on my list for a long time, but with the recent unfortunate death of the beloved Sean Connery, I needed to wait an appropriate time to drop this video. Now, this review is in no way to tarnish, disrespect, or degrade the efforts of this World War II epic or its amazing cast, but being brutally honest about it, I truly think that A Bridge Too Far is such a lame film. So let's jump immediately into the topic. A Bridge Too Far is an epic war film directed by Richard Attenborough and features probably the best lineup of actors, maybe of all time. It would be an understatement to call this an all-star cast. The main cast alone consists of 7 Oscar-winning superstars and 5 nominated actors, and was made by a 2-time Academy Award-winning filmmaker. Not to mention, it was written by the screenwriting legend and Academy Award winner, William Goldman. And lastly, some of my personal favorite actors are in this movie: Gene Hackman, Sean Connery, and Anthony Hopkins. But before I get into what I disliked about this movie, I do need to pay it its earned respects. Firstly, the film was very historically accurate, not only through realistically depicting the events of Operation Market Garden, but through authentically portraying the Western Front of World War II. Visually, this is probably the best-looking World War II movie. Anywhere from its period-correct technology, weapons, uniforms, and tactics, I have no doubt, nor do I question this being an amazing visual representation of Operation Market Garden. Not only that, but I 100% respect the director's attitude of complete accuracy and authenticity for the movie. Not only by filming the battles and combat scenes where the real-life battles actually took place, but by using realistic equipment used by the armies of the Western Front. Anywhere from the small craft riverboat to the airplanes, the tanks, and parachute equipment. And lastly, I love how this movie used special effects that were practical to craft the battle scenes. Not only does that make them look so much better and real, it truly showed how much the filmmakers were dedicated to showing the combat as realistic as possible. And efforts like that directors take are so respected and appreciated. Unlike other really popular war movies. Gettysburg. Okay. So now that I've paid respects to the technical and historical achievements of the movie, now it's time to get into what I didn't like about it. A Bridge Too Far had what I like to call the good, the bad, and the ugly effect on me. The good, the bad, and the ugly effect is when you finally watch an epic film you've wanted to watch for a while, a film that has been praised for its epicness, acting, and legacy as one of the greats. Not just in its genre, but for the entirety of cinema itself. And while you're watching it, the film starts out amazing and everything you hoped it would be. But then you reach a certain point where the movie loses pace and starts to slow down. Then it gets slower and slower to the point where you actually say in your mind, or maybe even out loud, this is the movie that everyone's been talking about. This is what all the fuss is about. This can't be it. Now, I know for a fact everyone has experienced this at least once in their life. Maybe not for this film in particular, but even if you don't agree that A Bridge Too Far fits the criteria for the effect, you do know what I'm talking about. And just for fun, right now, please, pause the video. Comment below right now a certain movie that gave you the good, the bad, and the ugly effect, because we've all been there. Sorry to get off topic. So, the movie starts out with a voiceover explaining the historical background of the movie before it actually begins. It's 1944. The Allies are advancing through Western Europe, and the Germans are retreating. The Allied advance is slowed since all their vital supplies had to come from overseas and trucked up from Normandy. Field Marshal Montgomery, legendary British military leader, devises a plan he believes that will end the war in a few months. He plans to use the 1st Allied Airborne Army and the British 30 Corps to drive deep into the Netherlands, still occupied by the Germans, to capture a series of strategic bridges that would provide an invasion route into the industrial heart of Germany and ending the war as soon as possible. Given that the Allies had been winning numerous victories over the Germans, they were a bit overconfident and thought that Germany was on its last leg. Some even believed that the Germans wouldn't even fight. The operational plans were rushed together within a week, leaving little time for more careful consideration and strategy, and the end result was operational failure. In the movie, the build-up to the operation was really cool. It showed the strategy, the mindset of its core commanders. It showed the logistical problems and the concerns from its leaders. And it also established its main characters very well and in a not-in-your-face type of way. Long story short, once the operation was a go, we see the paratroopers jump out of their aircraft in the thousands, and then they land in the Dutch countryside. First, I want to mention is this, and I know this sounds really snobby, I honestly wasn't impressed with these scenes. I can consciously and logically see the brilliance of it by having actual World War II planes and people jump out of them in a spectacular shot. Also featuring the first person point of view angles to give more of a personal touch to the experience, but emotionally and as a viewer, I really wasn't impressed and didn't think it was as phenomenal as a lot of people made it out to be. And when our heroes finally land in enemy territory, it was kind of like a scramble and a rat race as to what was happening and whatnot. So with the onslaught of multiple different characters and armies going off all at once and running about, it made it harder to watch and enjoy because so many things were thrown at you. And honestly, as juvenile as this sounds, by this point, my mind was saying,
when do people start dying already?
What?
Yeah, this is super boring. No one's died yet.
I remember the exact moment the good, the bad, and the ugly effect hit me. It was when Sean Connery and his 1st Airborne Division came across the people who just escaped a mental institution, and they're all laughing uncontrollably.
Do you think they know something we don't?
I know what I said sounds really immature, and many will be saying that those scenes are integral to the plot and that I missed the point, but I can't help feeling let down at how uninteresting those scenes are. Okay, my friends, now let's talk about the combat. I was really disappointed at how much I didn't like the battle scenes, and I know this is pushing the boundaries by saying this, considering how people say that this movie has some of the best combat scenes, but they really weren't anything amazing. I know that I know what they were going for, and I know that a lot of effort went into making them, but the battles didn't do it for me. I didn't really enjoy them that much. I thought the Battle of Arnhem Bridge Road with Anthony Hopkins was actually boring. I just couldn't get into it. It wasn't cinematic enough or exciting. I really can't explain it any better, but I just didn't like it, which is a shame because most of the battles and most of the screen time fell upon Anthony Hopkins. I'm not saying that Hopkins did a bad job. His performance was very, very well done, but his battle scenes were pretty lame. I also didn't like how most of the battles were between the British and the Germans. The whole point of the Operation Market Garden was how it was an international operation that comprised of many armies. So mainly focusing on the British, or at least for the first half of the movie, was upsetting to an extent. It was disappointing because the Polish Brigade were only featured in 2 combat scenes and didn't seem like they contributed much, and that's unfortunate because World War II movies don't really pay much attention to the Polish armed forces in the West. And I want to mention one thing real fast. The Robert Redford scene where he and his men of the 82nd Airborne crossed the Wall River, that could have been an amazing scene, and the setup was so awesome, but again, the battle wasn't that great. And I found it a little annoying when Robert Redford kept repeating,
Hail Mary. With grace. Hail Mary. With grace. Hail Mary.
and look, I'm perfectly aware that the man Redford was playing, Major Cook, really did pray out loud, like seen in the movie, but after a while it was too much and it was overdone. Once the machine gun started to fire at the boats, and they made it to the other side, that's when it got interesting. But then it just stops abruptly to cut to something else. And the movie did that a lot. Once the battle started to get interesting, they cut to another scene, which was very bothersome. There were 2 combat scenes, in my opinion, that were actually good and enjoyable. The first was when the British 30 Corps were advancing on the wide stretch of the highway and was preceded with an amazing display of artillery being laid on the enemy positions to cover the armored column's advance. Then the Germans return fire, and it leads to what I like to call an artillery duel, where both sides drop shells on each other. Then machine gun emplacements open up, and that was really cool. I ate that scene up. I wish there was more of that in the film. And then the second combat scene I liked was when the Polish paratroopers dropped from the sky, but the Germans were waiting for them and opened up with the machine gun fire. But honestly, that scene was really short and not long enough, unfortunately. Speaking of the Polish, let's talk about Gene Hackman. I'm sure my consistent viewers know I adore Gene Hackman. And when I found out he was playing Polish General Sosabowski, that really surprised me, considering how Gene usually plays big or iconic characters of a certain typecast. So this was really surprising that he was going to be a Pole. Not that that's bad, but it was more of an unusual but interesting casting choice. However, I hated Sosabowski. He was such a douchebag. There were 2 scenes of his where he was just absolutely despicable. First was when the Allied commanders were being shown the aerial photographs of the city of Arnhem, and the Air Force officer and Sean Connery were having a discussion on the logistical problems, when Sosabowski just stands up, gets in the guy's face, and says,
"Just making sure whose side you're on."
Then he storms out. First of all, holy crap, how rude. Second of all, that was crossing the line by saying that the Royal Air Force was under a lot of stress in the war and fought really hard and really long campaigns that were essential to the Allied war effort. So to get in the airman's face and disrespect him like that in front of everybody, that English guy should have just punched him square in the face because he's fighting the war too. He's fighting the same enemy. Britain is getting bombed relentlessly. So for all we know, this guy might have had family members who were killed by the Germans. So that was pretty messed up to say that. And it's one of those, like, how dare you type of moments. Some people might be thinking, well, he had it worse. Poland is totally occupied and his people are put in camps. I agree. Poland suffered a lot during the war. But to say that to an ally trying to help you, I don't know. That just really pissed me off. The second scene where I thought he was being a dick was when he complained to Marcus Brody from Indiana Jones 3 that his parajump was delayed. So Brody politely explained how bad weather delayed the drop, and jumping in those conditions could be disastrous. And Sosabowski is just staring him down, giving him the stink eye. Like, what the hell is this guy's problem? It's not like he's standing up to these incompetent idiot leaders who are sending his men to die. He's chewing out subordinates who are just following orders, who aren't responsible for the tactical flaws in the operation. And it's not their fault or their problem. He's just taking out his anger on lower-level officers who aren't responsible for this mess. I wasn't mad when he raised his reasonable concerns to General Browning because Browning is more or less Monty's second in command. So if there was someone to get confronted about it, then it would be him. I'm sorry for that tangent, but I had to say it. And I just want to say right now, I'm in no way disrespecting the real General Sosabowski at all, but the movie made him look like such a douche. And speaking of people with the name James Caan. Look, I love old Jimmy Caan, but it's undeniable that he's a useless character that has absolutely no relevance to the plot. All of his scenes contributed nothing to anything the movie had to offer. His sole purpose was his dedication and loyalty to his captain, who he promised would survive. And what follows is his captain gets wounded off screen and Caan drives him to a hospital and at gunpoint forces a doctor to operate, which saves his life. Then the doctor, who's a colonel by the way, just lets him go and we never see him again. Seriously, his one role in the film is to save a captain who basically had only one screen, who doesn't mean much or anything to the audience, and who I bet many people didn't even catch his name. It was a waste and a total distraction from the main plot and action. And not for nothing, but his Dukes of Hazzard joyride through the woods just put me over the edge. That scene was so unbelievable, and not in the good way. I know that Hollywood is expected to take certain creative liberties with films to make their films or like sequences so much more enjoyable for the audience, but given that this is a true story and James's character was inspired by a real man who really did save his commanding officer in a similar way, this was just terrible. And my suspension of disbelief was just wasn't having it. I'm calling BS because there's no way that trained German soldiers could miss their target when it was mere feet in front of them. Even if it was a moving target, that Jeep would have been lit up. There's no way Caan would have made it out of there alive. At the very least, he's getting captured because he's totally surrounded. And I truly hated that. He was built up to be this tough and badass sergeant, but in the end, that didn't go anywhere or lead to anything. So I really did not like James Caan's character or the fact that it was in the movie. And let's just like swing back to unrealistic action sequences. I felt like the scene where Sean Connery and his two officers were trying to sneak their way to the occupied town and him going all Rambo on the Germans was just added so they could display Sean Connery in an action badass way. I'm not saying that the scene was bad, but I think it was just thrown in so Sean Connery could have his James Bond moment for the film. There's a few other things I didn't like, namely the scene where the Dutch kid dies and they put so much emphasis on his death being a tragedy, and then the sad music blares up. That was too in your face, and given that I wasn't really attached to this character, his death wasn't like, oh no, the horror, and then being told by the movie to the scene and its setup and the music that you're supposed to care wasn't really appreciated. And that probably sounds really terrible, but that's just how I feel. Well, guys, let's sum up. A Bridge Too Far. It wasn't a bad movie. Far from it. But in my opinion, it came off as lame. Some scenes didn't belong there. I feel like it over-glorified the operation to make it seem more successful than it really was, until the end scene where the soldiers retreat and the leaders call it off. While watching it, I didn't get the sense of disaster and failure as much as I thought I was going to. Having said that, there are a lot of things I really enjoyed about the movie. The performances were on point, the direction was great, and the movie visually portrayed World War II much better than many more popular films. And I think it authentically and accurately depicted World War II better than, say, Saving Private Ryan did. But wasn't to the same great epic and legendary scale or effect like movies such as Patton or Tora Tora Tora, but it does have such a legendary, just awesome movie quote that is straight up fucking epic. Listen to it right now.
Look at him, wild. Have you ever been liberated? I got divorced twice. Does that count? Yes, that counts.
Anyway, guys, that's all I have to say about A Bridge Too Far. I might have been a tad harsh on it, and I feel like it's one of those movies that upon your first few viewings of it, you don't like it, but in time, I might change my mind about it. If I do, I will totally let you know. I know that I definitely tickled the dragon making this video, especially releasing it so close to its star's death, and how movie and history buffs really love this film. So the dislikes and the nasty comments are going to be rolling in.
And I still wouldn't miss it for the world.
So with that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next Unpopular Opinion.